The moment Sylvie Marchant leaned across the corner table at Novak's diner and said to the man in the canvas work jacket, "I don't think you understand what it costs to say no to me in this town," nobody at the surrounding tables moved. Nobody said a word. Because in Millhaven, the Marchant name meant permits approved or delayed, contracts won or quietly lost, the kind of authority that didn't need to raise its voice to be felt in every room it entered. But 2 tables away, a woman in a pale green cardigan had already set down her tea and reached for her reading glasses. Not to read, but to look more carefully at what she was watching. And what she did afterward took down something that had been standing for a very long time. Kieran Doyle had been coming to Novak's every Friday for 6 years, not because the food was remarkable. Pete Novak would have been the first to say so, but because it was theirs, his and his son's. A corner booth, laminated menus, and Tess, who always brought Sam a coloring sheet from the stack by the register without being asked, even though Sam was 11 now and would have been mortified if Kieran mentioned it. Today wasn't a Friday, it was a Wednesday. But Sam had come home the night before with his math test, 93%, the highest he'd ever scored. And Kieran had said, without pausing, "Novak's, tomorrow, whatever you want." They'd ordered 20 minutes ago. Sam had the grilled cheese and a chocolate milkshake, which was always the order, regardless of the occasion. Kieran had his coffee and a bowl of soup he'd been letting cool while he listened to Sam explain, with the focused intensity he brought to things that mattered to him, why 93 wasn't actually that surprising given how he'd approached the fractions unit differently. "I made a chart," Sam said. "I know. I saw the chart. It's a good chart. It's an excellent chart." Sam looked up to check if he was being sarcastic. Satisfied he wasn't, he went back to his milkshake. That was the moment Sylvie Marchant walked in. Kieran noticed her the way you noticed weather. A shift in the air. Something moving that hadn't been moving before. She was in her early 40s, dressed in the way that certain people dressed when they wanted a room to understand immediately that they had options. A charcoal blazer, dark trousers with a crease that looked deliberate, boots that cost what Kieran made in a good week at the garage. 2 people came in behind her, a younger woman with a tablet held close to her chest, and a man in a dark suit who positioned himself near the door and stayed there. Sylvie Marchant didn't look around the diner the way most people did when they came somewhere new. She assessed it. Her gaze moved across the tables, the couple by the window, the older man with his newspaper, the young family in the center booth, and stopped at the corner. Their booth. Tess was already moving toward her. "Hi there, welcome to Novak's. We're pretty full right now, but I can." "That table." Sylvie's voice was pleasant, exactly as pleasant as it needed to be. "I need it for a meeting." "That one's occupied," Tess said. "But I can put together 2 tables near the lighting here is wrong, and I need the outlet." That table has the outlet. She was already moving toward them. "How long have they been there?" "About 20 minutes. "That's fine." She stopped at the edge of the booth, looked at Kieran. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I need this table." Kieran looked up. He took in the blazer, the posture, the assistant, hovering 2 steps back. He set down his spoon. "We just ordered," he said. "I can see that." She glanced at the food, then at him. Her expression was patient in the way that suggested patience was a resource she was rationing. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes. Clients coming in from Hamilton. I need the space and the outlet." A pause. "What would make this easy for you?" Sam had stopped drinking his milkshake. He was watching. "We'll be done when we're done," Kieran said. "There are tables along the wall." Something in Sylvie Marchant's expression shifted, not dramatically, just a degree or 2 behind the eyes. "You know who I am?" "No." She tilted her head, not unkind exactly. More the way someone tilted their head at a problem they'd expected to be simpler. "My company built the community center on Lakeshore. We're developing the Grayfield mixed-use project on the north end. We've been working with the town council for 4 years." She looked around the diner, at Pete behind the counter, at Tess, at the other tables. "I think most people here know the name." The room had gone quiet, not loudly quiet. The quiet of people who decided not to reach for their coffee cups for a moment. "I'm sure that's true," Kieran said. "We're still eating." She looked at his hands on the table. There were traces of grease in the creases of his knuckles that never quite came out anymore. Not since he'd started working the shop floor himself again instead of managing it. His canvas jacket had a small tear at the left cuff he kept meaning to fix. She looked at his hands the way you looked at a price tag before deciding. "What do you do?" she asked. "I run a garage." "Here in town?" "Yes." She nodded slowly, as though this confirmed a calculation she'd already run. "Then you understand how things work. Permits go through the council. Inspections follow a schedule. Everything in a town this size runs on relationships." A pause. "I have a lot of relationships in this town." Nobody at the surrounding tables moved. "I have a booth," Kieran said. "Same as you need one." The pleasant expression didn't disappear. It curdled at the edges. "I'm trying to be direct because I think it's kinder." Her gaze dropped to his jacket again, just for a second, reflexive, like checking the weather. "Your garage. When's the last time you went through an inspection cycle?" Tess made a small sound from across the room. Pete, behind the counter, had gone very still. "I'm asking," Sylvie continued, "because businesses in a town like this operate within relationships that I have some influence over. I'm not threatening you. I'm helping you understand what this moment is, practically speaking." She waited. The room waited with her. And Kieran looked at Sam. Sam had put both hands under the table. He was gripping the edge of the seat. Kieran could tell by the slight rise of his shoulders the particular stillness that had come over him. Sam didn't cry easily. He hadn't cried in public since he was 8. But he had learned, in the 4 years since his mother died, to go very still when he was working very hard at not showing anything. That was the thing that settled it. Not the comment about his jacket, not the inspection threat, not the way she'd looked at his hands like they told her everything she needed to know. It was Sam's hands under the table, holding on. Sam. He kept his voice easy. The same voice he used at 2 a.m. when Sam woke from a bad dream and needed talking back to earth. "Go ahead and finish your milkshake." "Dad." "Finish it, bud. We've got time." He looked back at Sylvie Marchant, not with anger, with attention, the way he looked at an engine he was trying to understand. Patient and specific. "We'll be done when we're done," he said. "You're welcome to wait at the counter." She stared at him for a moment. Then she made a short, private sound, almost a laugh, reached for her phone, and made a call with her back half-turned, voice low. Her eyes stayed on the room. Pete Novak came out from behind the counter. He was a big man, Polish-Canadian, had played hockey until his knees gave out at 38, and had been running this diner for 15 years since. He walked to their table, folded his arms, and looked at Sylvie Marchant in the measured way of someone choosing each word. "This booth is spoken for, has been every time these two come in." He looked at Tess. "Get them whatever they need." Sylvie looked at Pete the way you'd look at a piece of furniture that had unexpectedly moved. "I'll remember this establishment," she said. "Good," Pete said pleasantly. "We've been here 30 years. She took a table near the window. Her people settled in around her. She opened her laptop and did not look over again. But 2 tables away, the woman in the pale green cardigan had already set a few bills on the table beside her tea. She walked to the door without hurrying. Outside on the sidewalk, she stood for a moment watching the street, not the diner, and then she found her phone and pressed a number she still had saved under a name she hadn't deleted after she retired. It rang 4 times. "Vera." A pause. "I thought you were done with all this." "I am done," Vera Ogilvy said. "I'm calling as a private citizen. Can you take a recorded statement?" She had spent 21 years as a senior investigator for the Ontario Provincial Auditor's Office. She had dismantled 2 municipal contracting networks and 1 regional development scheme. She knew, with the specific certainty of someone who had spent decades reading rooms, that what she had just witnessed was not an isolated incident of bad behavior from a powerful woman. It was a symptom. She recognized the mechanism, the way every employee in that diner had contracted, making themselves smaller, the practiced reflex of people who had learned through repetition that a certain name meant a certain kind of danger. That was not the result of one person's personality. That was the result of systems, of patterns, of years. She gave the full account, names, times, physical descriptions, direct quotes, the body language of the staff, the way the server had tried to speak and stopped herself, the security detail by the door. She described it the way an investigator described things, not stumbling toward the details, but arriving at them precisely. Fran Alcott, her former supervisor at the provincial auditor's office, was quiet for a long moment after. "We have a file on Marchant Group," she said finally, 11 months old, tendering irregularities on the Grayfield development. 3 separate municipal employees flagged it internally and then, after a period of restructuring, stopped flagging it. "We've been waiting for a thread." A pause. "You just handed us one." Vera looked at the diner door. She could see, through the glass, the corner booth where the man had been sitting with his son. Someone else was in it now. "The father's name is Kieran Doyle," she said. "He did nothing wrong. He was there for his son's lunch. I want that on the record." Understood. He's a private person. Whatever comes next, he doesn't get pulled into it. "I hear you." "Good. Then get to work." She hung up, stood another moment in the October cold, and went back inside to leave a proper tip. Then she walked home and did not feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had done what she was obligated to do. She knew well enough not to confuse the two. Kieran didn't know any of that. He was watching his son finish a chocolate milkshake with the focused pleasure of someone who had earned it. When Tess brought the bill, he left enough for the meal and a tip that was a little more than he could comfortably spare that week. He wasn't paying attention to the room when they stood up to leave. He'd been paying attention to Sam. He wasn't expecting the sound. The man at the counter started it, then the woman by the window, then the older couple in the middle, the man getting to his feet before his wife could even react. Then, one by one, not dramatic, not theatrical, just real, the diner was on its feet clapping. Not loudly. Just the sound of people standing up. Just the sound of people standing up, a few of them nodding at Kieran, with the particular look you gave someone when they'd done something you were glad to have seen. Sam's eyes went wide. Kieran kept his face still. He put his hand briefly on the back of Sam's neck. The way you did when you wanted to say something you didn't have a word for. And they walked out into the gray October afternoon. Sylvie Marchant was on her phone near the window. She did not look up as they passed. They stopped at the grocery store on the way home. Sam spent 9 minutes deciding between 2 kinds of Dove juice, which Kieran watched through the store window with the patience of a man who had learned that not everything needed to be hurried. His sister Moira texted at 5:15, heard about Novak's. "You okay?" He typed back, "Fine, Sam's fine, getting groceries." 3 dots. Then the woman who was watching, silver hair, green sweater, her name is Vera Ogilvy. She was a provincial auditor for 20 years. People are talking. He read it twice. Sam appeared at the car window, holding up 2 juice cartons with an expression that required an immediate decision. He unlocked the door. They drove home. They had pasta. Sam explained, at some length, a debate he was having with his friend Dev about whether electric cars were actually better for the environment when you factored in battery production, which had apparently grown into something requiring a formal argument with citations. Kieran did not look up Vera Ogilvy's name until Sam was asleep. What he found made him sit very still at the kitchen table for a long time. The investigation did not announce itself. It expanded quietly, the way water moved through a foundation, invisible until something gave. Fran Alcott's team made contact with a former town planning coordinator named Dale Sutton, who had returned no calls for 4 months and returned one the following week. A contracts administrator named Bet Prue sent a written statement through a lawyer. A woman named Teresa Gould, who ran a small landscaping company and had watched a municipal contract she was qualified for go to a company she had never heard of, showed up at the auditor's office in person on a Monday morning. None of these were dramatic moments. They happened in kitchens and parked cars and small offices. They looked like nothing from the outside, but they were the kind of moments that, added together, started to sound like something. Sylvie Marchant had always been good at reading rooms. It was one of the things she had genuinely earned rather than inherited. A sensitivity to social temperature that had served her in boardrooms and municipal chambers for 20 years. What she was reading now was deeply unpleasant. The room she usually moved through with ease had developed a texture she didn't recognize. Not hostility, just a careful neutrality. Calls returned more slowly. A lunch postponed via text from someone who had never once postponed a lunch. The counselor she spoke with weekly had gone from 30-minute conversations to 10-minute ones that ended with reasons that didn't quite land. She told herself it was the diner, that it would pass. She'd handled worse. She was still telling herself this. Her lawyer called on a Thursday evening and said the provincial auditor's office had made formal contact. She sat in the parking garage under her building for a long time in the dark before she went upstairs. 3 weeks after Novak's, Kieran's phone rang from an unknown number on a Tuesday evening. He almost didn't answer. "Mr. Doyle," a woman's voice, unhurried. "My name is Vera Ogilvy. I got your number from Pete Novak." He sat down on the couch. "That's fine. I called because you deserve to know that I filed a witness account the afternoon we were both in the diner. I'm not in a position to tell you much beyond that, but I didn't want you caught off guard if things become public in the coming weeks." "Will they?" "I think so, yes. Your name may come up in coverage only as a reference, not as part of any investigation." He looked toward Sam's room, the light still on under the door. "Anything I need to do?" "Probably not. If anyone contacts you, journalist, official, don't say anything until you know exactly who they are." A pause. "You have a son," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." "Keep the focus there. That's my advice, for whatever it's worth." Another pause, shorter. "You handled yourself well that afternoon, Mr. Doyle." So did he. He held the phone for a minute after she hung up. Through the door, he could hear Sam moving things around his room. The particular sound of someone reorganizing a shelf that was probably fine before they started. He got up and knocked on the door. "Still up?" "Reorganizing my bookshelf." "It was fine before." "That's not the point." "You want hot chocolate?" Sam considered this from the floor, surrounded by books. "Yeah, okay." They sat at the kitchen table at 9:30, and Kieran did not think about the auditor's office, or Vera Ogilvy, or Sylvie Marchant once. The formal findings went to the provincial attorney's office 8 weeks after the diner. 190 pages, 11 witnesses, financial records from 2 municipal departments, a 6-year timeline of tendering irregularities. Sylvie Marchant stepped back from the Greyfield project 3 days before the public announcement. 2 municipal officials were named as subjects of formal review. The Marchant Group's active contracts were placed under third-party audit. Sylvie's lawyer released 1 paragraph. Moira texted Kieran at 7 in the morning. "Did you see? It's in the paper." He made his coffee first. He read the story. He folded the paper and drove Sam to school and came home and opened the garage. 6 months later, on a Sunday evening, they were doing dishes. Sam washed, Kieran dried. An arrangement they'd had since Sam was 8 and declared himself old enough to contribute properly. "Dad." Sam wasn't looking up from the pot he was scrubbing. "Yeah." "That woman at the diner. The one who wanted our booth." "What about her?" Sam rinsed the pot and set it in the rack. "I've been thinking about her." Kieran took it, dried it, waited. "I think she was probably really unhappy," Sam said. "What makes you say that?" "Because." He picked up the next dish. "You don't do that if things are actually okay with you. If you feel good about who you are, you don't need other people to step aside for you. You don't need to make them feel like they're less." He paused. "I've been reading about it. For a thing at school, it's like a defense mechanism, making someone else feel small so you feel bigger for a little while." Kieran looked at his son, 11 years old, standing at the sink in an old hockey sweatshirt, talking about defense mechanisms on a Sunday night. "That's pretty much right," he said. "So I feel kind of sorry for her." Sam shrugged with the nonchalance of someone who had made a decision and was finished with it. Not because what she did was okay, but because if you need to do that to feel important, something's gone wrong a long time before that moment in the diner. Kieran handed him the next thing to wash. "You said something that day," Sam continued, "afterward, about how some people can't tell the difference between what they own and what they're worth." "I remember." "I think about that." He looked up. "If nobody ever taught them that difference, is it still their fault?" Kieran stopped drying. He looked at his son, really looked at him. "I think it's both," he said. "You can understand why someone is the way they are and still believe they should do better. That's not a contradiction." Sam nodded slowly. went back to the dishes. I don't want to stay angry about it, he said. It takes up too much room. They finished in the easy quiet of two people who had shared space long enough that silence between them was never empty. Kieran thought, setting the last bowl in the cabinet, that his wife would have loved this conversation. She would have pulled him into the hallway, with her hand over her mouth, eyes lit up, whispering, "Did you hear what he just said?" She had always been the one who caught those moments first. He thought about her gently now, the way he'd learned to over 4 years. The grief had changed shape, not smaller, just differently held, less like a sudden drop, and more like something he carried that had worn grooves exactly to it, so that some days he barely felt the weight, and other days it was all there at once, and that was simply how it was going to be. He'd decided, in a hospital corridor he didn't like to think about in detail, that whatever came next was going to have his full attention, that Sam was going to have his full attention, that the version of himself he built from that point on would be someone Sam could lean on without it costing either of them. He didn't always get it right. He got it wrong in the smaller ways. Too short on bad days, too inside his own head sometimes to catch the real thing Sam was saying underneath the thing he said. But Sam came to him with the real stuff, the complicated questions, the late-night worries without names, the Sunday dish conversations that turned into something unexpected. That was what he'd worked for. That was the whole thing. 8 years later, the gymnasium at Millhaven District High School held 500 people, and on a warm June evening, every chair was filled and another 40 were standing along the side walls. Kieran sat in the 4th row with Moira beside him. Moira had been quietly losing a battle against herself since approximately the moment they'd parked. She was managing it with the committed effort of someone who considered public crying a personal failure. "I'm not crying," she said. "I know," Kieran said. His son walked to the podium. Sam Doyle was 19, tall, with his mother's calm eyes and his own particular way of standing. Weight slightly back, the posture of someone who wasn't in a hurry to speak, but meant every word when he did. He arranged his notes, found Kieran in the 4th row, gave him a look, not quite a smile, more of a check-in, "You there?" and then looked at the room and began. He had shown Kieran the speech 2 weeks earlier. Kieran had read it at the kitchen table, and when he looked up, he said, "Sam, this is really good. You have to say that. I have to mean it too, the part about the diner." A pause. I wasn't sure if it was too personal. It's exactly personal enough. Sam had picked up the pages and gone back to his room without another word. Now, standing at a podium in front of 500 people, Sam Doyle talked about a Wednesday afternoon 8 years ago, a diner in their town, a lunch to celebrate a math test, a woman who had come in and tried to move them from their booth, not because she truly needed a table, but because she had decided, in the manner of people who have been permitted to, that her time was simply worth more than theirs. He didn't name anyone. He didn't need to. He talked about what he had learned by watching his father in that booth. Not by anything, his father said. By the specific quality of his stillness, that you could hold your ground and your dignity at the same time, that those things were not in opposition, that the way you treated people when you held an advantage over them was the truest measure of who you were, and the way you held yourself when someone else held the advantage was the second truest. He talked about wanting to study civil engineering, not to build things that impressed, but to build things that held. Things that worked for everyone who needed them, not only the people who got to choose. "My dad is not a symbol," Sam said. "He's a person who burns things in the oven and once spent 20 minutes looking for his phone while he was already on it." Laughter moved through the room. "But he showed me something by just being who he is consistently, even when it wasn't convenient, even when it cost something. That dignity doesn't require an audience. That doing the right thing in a quiet room, at a table in a diner, with your kid watching, matters exactly as much as doing it when anyone's looking." A pause. Maybe more. He looked down at his notes, then back up. "He's in the 4th row with my aunt, who has been crying since the parking lot." Moira grabbed Kieran's arm. "Hi, Dad." He kept his eyes on his son and worked very hard at his own face. Kept it together, barely. The way you kept it together when the person you'd spent everything on was up there being completely, specifically himself, more himself than you'd known how to hope for, and you thought, I did that. We did that. It cost everything it cost, and here he is. Vera Ogilvy watched the speech on a recording a former colleague sent her 3 days later. She watched it twice at her kitchen table in the morning, her tea going cold beside her the way she always let it. She thought about the afternoon at Novak's, the decision to step outside and make the call, which had felt at the time like the only thing a person with her history and her training could reasonably do. She had never quite understood why people called it courage. The alternative had always seemed so clearly worse. She finished her tea, then she got up and went to her garden. On the first Saturday of July, Kieran Doyle walked into Novak's with his son, who was leaving for university in September, and who ordered the grilled cheese and chocolate milkshake without looking at the menu. They sat in the corner booth. Tess brought their drinks before they asked. Pete came out of the kitchen and stood at the end of the table with his arms folded and didn't say much, because Pete Novak expressed himself through presence, and his presence said what it always had. Coming back at Christmas? Pete asked Sam. Obviously, Sam said. Pete nodded, looked at Kieran. He'll be fine. I know, Kieran said. Pete went back to the kitchen. The afternoon light came through the front windows at its usual angle. A toddler 2 tables over was systematically dismantling a grilled cheese with the focused determination of a professional. The older couple near the door were sharing a piece of pie the way they did every Saturday. Kieran had seen them here 100 times without knowing their names. By the door, in a plain frame Pete had hung on a quiet Wednesday without announcing it, a few words in Pete's own uneven handwriting. A person's worth is measured not by what they demand, but by what they protect. Kieran drank his coffee while it was still hot. There were things he could have thought about. 8 years of things. Everything that had moved and shifted in the gap between that October Wednesday and this July Saturday. The investigation. The story in the paper he'd read in 2 minutes and set aside. The slow, imperfect work of a town finding its footing again. He didn't think about any of it. She smiled at her desk. He watched his son eat a grilled cheese with the same focused pleasure he'd brought to it since he was 7 years old. Still the best milkshake, Sam said. Still the best, Kieran agreed. Outside, Millhaven moved through its Saturday, ordinary and continuous and mostly invisible, the way real life was, the way the things that mattered most tended to be, unremarkable from the outside, everything from the inside. The coffee was hot. His son was across the table, almost gone and not gone yet. That was enough. It had always been enough.